Hey, everybody, and welcome to the Mighty Matt Podcast. I'm Matt Sterling, your host. Welcome to part 2 of my conversation with disabled activist Lex Frieden. In the previous episode, we discussed Lex's injury as a result of a car accident, his perilous journey through rehab, and getting denied admission to Oral Roberts University based on a disability. Today, we'll follow Lex's journey as he joins the National Council on Disability and helps create the Americans with Disabilities Act, finally providing civil rights for the disabled community. Lex, welcome back to the podcast. How you doing?
I'm doing fine, Matt. Thank you for having me today.
Absolutely. So we left off when you were at Tulsa University with your dad, and the dean had suggested making a reasonable accommodation of getting your classes into one of the more accessible buildings. So what happened after that?
So I went to Tulsa and graduated in 3 years. But the interesting thing was I kept watching the classes that would be in that accessible building. And before I knew it, I had a degree in psychology.
Oh, wow.
I had a great advisor. I really liked her, Irene Horton. I went to Dr. Horton when I was about to graduate and said, "What should I do now?"
Right.
And she said, "Well, an undergraduate degree in psychology would get you a job as a clerk in a department store." But she said, "If you really want to make a living being a psychologist, you need to go to graduate school." And so I started looking around for graduate schools. I had a good average in college and good recommendations and did
Sure.
well on the graduate record exam. And I found that in Houston, where I was comfortable since I'd been to rehab there, I found the University of Houston that offered me a graduate assistantship.
Okay.
A faculty member at U of H named Shalom Feinberg was in the psychology department, and he had an appointment at TIRR, the rehabilitation hospital where I
Oh,
had
wow.
been, and Dr. Weinberg arranged for me to have an assistantship. And Houston was one of only 2 very accessible college campuses that we could locate at the time.
Yep.
The tier also had a unique program that Dr. Spencer had started where a group of us who were either working or students could live in a communal type setting.
Yep.
We hired our own assistants, caregivers to work there. But
And did they
so
live right there with you?
no, that's an interesting question. The program was set up so that we were a self-managed pod. And
Okay.
we lived in this facility and needed to hire assistants ourselves.
Okay.
And this was at the end of the Vietnam conflict.
Yes.
And there were a number of people, conscientious observers,
Yep.
young men who refused to go and fight. They could apply for that category.
Okay.
And for religious reasons or other reasons, they could be classified as conscientious observers, and
Yep.
they were willing and able to help us. So that was a fully accessible place, and we had transportation arranged for ourselves to get back and forth to work and campus at U of H. And the U of
Yep.
H campus had many ramps because Feinberg had experimented with a program where he put ramps on the buildings and then compared the number of people who used the ramps to those who were walking up and down the steps.
Great. So sort of
Yeah,
that universal design. This will be good for
exactly.
everybody.
He was experimenting with that in the early 1970s, late 1960s,
Yeah.
and was involved in the beginning of a psychology
Okay.
called behavioral ecology. And we were interested in the way people behaved and the way behavior shaped other behavior. For
Sure.
example, at the university, rather than simply build sidewalks around the perimeter, he organized the university so that when they put up a new building, they wouldn't
Yep.
build a sidewalk to it. They would watch where the students walked in order to get to the entrance. And
Sure.
after determined where the students were walking, then and only then did they lay down the sidewalk.
Nice.
And it was a very practical solution. When I was a graduate student there, we were able to hire our own caregivers and live in that environment. We hired a
Yep.
lot of the conscientious objectors and a number of women who were students at the university. I was studying psychology. I met a young man who had been in Vietnam and had a brain injury,
Okay.
and he needed help remembering, frankly, what day it was or where he
Sure.
lived or anything like that. I he suggested we have a symbiotic relationship here.
Right.
I can remember where you are and what day it is, and you can help me put my pants on.
That's right. That's right.
And so Malcolm had been a medic in the service, and so he had been trained in nursing, and he could remember basic skills despite his injury. And so we moved away from the facility and rented a home.
Okay.
And the only issue that we had was neither one of us could drive. So
Okay.
I hired another fellow who was a student who lived with us, and we all had our jobs. I had to manage the finances and the rent, and Mac had to help me with my personal care,
Yep.
and I helped him with his memory. And Robert was the driver, and he would drive us back and forth to town and to school and to work while he was going to school. And we all sort of lived symbiotically in that house.
Yeah,
And
sure.
at some point, I decided to organize people with disabilities in Houston,
Okay.
needed somebody to type the minutes to the meeting,
Yeah.
and found a young woman at the university who was a wheelchair user,
Okay.
and invited her to come to my home to help type the bylaws and the minutes and so on to the
Yep.
meeting. Well, make a long story short, one night we had a terrible rain in Houston. It was flooding.
Okay.
It was time for her to go home, and I said, "You can't possibly leave the house now. It's flooding outside."
Yeah,
She
yeah.
said, "Well, I don't have any place to stay here." And I said, "Well, you can stay in the room with me."
Okay.
That was pretty clever, right?
Yeah, that
So
is slick, right.
she said, "No, I can't do that." I said, "Well, I won't harm you. I won't mess around if you don't want to mess around." And she said, "No." She said, "That's not it." She said, "I can't get in the bathroom. Your bathroom is not accessible." And I said, "Well, there's no need for me to have it accessible. My caregivers can walk in
Sure.
and out of the bathroom and carry
Right.
whatever needs to be carried." She said, "Well, they're not going to carry me."
That's
And
right. That's right.
"Well, we can fix that." So I called my neighbor who was pretty handy, and my neighbor came over with some tools, and in about 45 minutes, he had ripped the edge of taken the bathroom door off and ripped the frame off,
That's
and
great.
now we had a hole in the wall going to the bathroom, and she had no excuse not to spend the night.
That's great.
And then she eventually became my wife, Joyce,
Oh,
and
that's wonderful.
that was a wonderful experience, although it did cost me about $150 to get the door fixed.
Yeah, you're gonna lose your, deposit on that one.
Exactly.
Oh, God, that's great. So,
But
that's where you met your wife, huh?
that's exactly right. Anyway, we Joyce eventually replaced Robert as a
Okay.
driver, and the three of us lived together for 47 years until Joyce
Wow.
passed recently. Life was good. I mean, we managed on the income I had from working as a graduate research assistant at the
Sure.
university. I had an opportunity to work as a research assistant at the rehab hospital,
Okay.
and I took that job along with going to school and being a teaching assistant there. And in the process of working at the rehab center, became introduced to the president of the medical school. That man's name was Michael DeBakey.
Okay.
Michael DeBakey was one of the early heart transplant pioneers, and Dr. DeBakey I don't know why, but he liked me, and
Sure. Well, you're a likable guy, Lex.
he invited me to work for the university as a research instructor. At some point there in the mid 1970s,
Yep.
still in graduate school, taking a few hours every semester, but enjoying the work. And I was involved in my advocacy. I was involved in work. I was losing interest in school.
Yep.
I needed to write a dissertation in order to get my PhD. I'd finished everything else, and I wanted to write the dissertation about disability access and accommodation and behavioral activities of people with disabilities, how our behavior was shaped by the environment, not
Yep.
necessarily by our own attitudes.
Sure.
And my advisors at the university refused to let me write a dissertation on that subject. They said it's a faux subject. There's no background literature to use to support your thesis. And
What?
if you're going to write a dissertation, it's going to be on smoking cessation. And that was my reaction. Oh, no, no,
Yeah.
no.
No. No. No.
I'm really not, I don't really care about that. And I'm not willing to learn about it just in order to get a PhD because I
Right.
don't want a PhD in how to stop smoking. So I left the university
Okay.
and I had a job working for the medical school.
Okay.
And so I started to write grant proposals with my colleague, Gene Cole, and we were very successful, thank goodness to the Rehabilitation Services Administration at that time.
That's great.
Back
And
then,
what were some of the grants that you were getting?
we were interested in how people became independent in the community.
Great. Great.
All these young people who had left the rehabilitation center, you see, here's an interesting dynamic. 1950s, most people with spinal cord injuries died usually from infection or other
Yeah.
complications. So as a result of some of the medical research that occurred subsequent to World War II and began to be applied during the Vietnam War, there were fewer people were dying from infection, and the doctors were beginning to develop the field of physical medicine and rehabilitation.
Yep.
And so there were more specialists in the area. People with disabilities were living longer, and therefore their lives were dependent on others. And most of the ones who left the rehab program, if they lived very long after that, were dependent on their families.
Yeah.
And so we had a whole cadre of people in Houston who were living at home, adults with disabilities
Okay.
living at home who clearly would preferred to have lived more independently, but they didn't have any training, experience,
Sure.
knowledge, know-how, help, or anything else. And we developed this little program where people could come. We would, invite them and they would come and live in this shared living community and hire their own attendants. They would learn how to direct their own care, how to
Yeah.
find people and hire them. And we called that program New Options and we documented it. So we, measured how people were behaving,
Oh, great.
what their attitudes were, whether they were working or going to school.
Now, was this a facility that was a rental, or you created a place that people could live, or
Oh, man,
what was the physical structure?
you got all these questions, Matt. You really are. You're really insightful. So this place goes back to the point in time when there were a group of former patients that went
Yep.
to the CEO at a rehabilitation hospital.
Okay.
They said to him, "You made some false promises to us. You told us if we do well in rehab, we could be more independent, we could go to school and go to work, and we needed to take care of ourselves and learn how
Yep.
to do so. And however, we're all living at home with our parents
That's not independent, right?
because there's no place to live. There's
Yeah,
no
sure.
place." And William Spencer took that to heart. There was a woman here who was the wife of the publisher of the newspaper,
Okay.
who was quite well to do,
Yep.
and her husband died and left her with a mansion, and she used all the rooms in the house to
Nice.
house her aging friends whose husbands had died primarily.
Yep.
So these were older women who were living together in this mansion, and she was paying for caregivers and hiring them and so on. Well, eventually she died.
Oh,
She was concerned before she died that she would have no place for these women to
right.
live. So she started building a facility on land she owned
Oh,
in
wow.
downtown Houston, and it was built kind of on the model of a nursing home with
Okay.
multiple rooms, and her vision was that they would have this place to live. Well, she died before it got finished,
Okay.
and the estate sold it, and Dr. Spencer bought it for a
Nice.
for a dime on a dollar, and he bought it and got donations to finish it, put the roof on it, and so on,
Yep.
and he let us live there.
Now, this is prior to any regulation, because my dad was in construction and sort of he was very in tune with what somebody in a wheelchair needed because I was in a wheelchair. But, were you guiding the development of this to say, the doors have to be this wide, the ramps have to be this high?
Spencer was a unique person. He was a rehab doctor, and
Okay.
he wanted to be an architect and an engineer.
Oh, nice. Perfect combo.
So he designed the build out himself with the knowledge that he had of
Oh,
people with disabilities, kind of like your
yeah, that's
father.
great.
So we all lived there, and that's where we hired people to help us. And then we transformed that into this program where we would, when there was a vacancy, invite somebody who was an applicant, wanted to
Sure.
move away from their home. We'd invite them to come in, and in exchange for the place to live, we would use them as subjects for our data collection. And we got a lot of funding from the rehab services
Yeah.
and from the state to measure the progress and
Yep.
see what needed. So when people came to live there, their contract with us was you have to
Right.
be engaged either in school or work. One young man came, and he wasn't interested in school, probably wasn't a candidate, but he did want to live in the place. He was highly motivated, and he knew that in order to live in the place, he would have to get a job. So he went down, rolled his wheelchair down a few blocks to a main street in Houston, and went door to door asking people if they would hire him.
Sure.
And nobody was interested in a
Yeah.
young man in a wheelchair with little education.
Right.
And he got to a porn shop, and he went in, and the proprietor said, "Yeah," he said, "I think I've got a job for you."
That's great.
And he said, "Well, what would that be?" He said, "Well, my place is so popular,
Yep.
I don't have enough parking spots, and the people come and take up my parking spots who are going to the washateria. So I need a guard out front to keep my spots open for the people who want to come for the porn. I don't want them there for the
Right. I
washateria."
don't want them washing their clothes. Right.
So so he got a job working at the porn shop. I'll never forget the next morning he comes back to the meeting, and we're there. You're gonna get the test now. Are you in school? No.
Sure. Sure.
Job? Yeah. Well, what's your job? We're doing research. We got to make a note and document
Yep.
this. And he said, "Well, I'll work at Fred's." Fred, what's Fred do? Well, he runs the porn shop down here. For guys' sakes, that we're going to document that and say we're subsidizing a man who's working at the porn shop.
That's right.
You don't have to put down there that I'm interested in the porn. You just
No,
put
no,
down,
no. He's just interested
I
in the job.
got a job as a security agent, a parking guard. So
Absolutely.
So we did, and it's in the record now. Anyway,
That's great.
that just gives you an example of how life was.
Oh, it's so cool. Facilities like this around the country? Or
Yeah.
was this really the first thing?
Nonetheless, we did the research and we did the data, and we showed that people could transition and we called it a transitional living program.
Yep.
At,
Sure.
at the same time, this is the early 1970s.
Yep.
Ed Roberts in California had started the Berkeley Center for Independent Living,
Yep.
and Fred Fay had started the Boston Center for Independent Living.
Okay.
So we began to document this kind of evolution of these
Yeah.
so-called independent living programs.
Oh, nice.
And there were 10 of these programs around at the time, and there was debate. The Berkeley people said there's no need for housing. If you have housing, then it's more or less a nursing home.
Right. Right. Right.
We argued that in Houston, it wasn't long-term housing. It was only for the training. In Boston, they argued it's just a dormitory like any other dormitory with young students in it.
Sure.
And so there were variations. I considered it my job to document all that and do the
Yeah.
research on it. So
That's
that's how
amazing. Is that what led you into meeting somebody like Justin Dart, or how did that happen?
it was. It's a nice transition there because Justin had been in Japan
Yep.
and he he was a anti-war protester there, but after the War, he moved back to Texas. He was a wheelchair user. He had had polio a decade before that, and he was in Austin. He got interested in the lives of people with disabilities. Was the son of a very wealthy man.
Yeah. It was Walgreens, right?
That's right. So he heard about our program and he called me and introduced himself as a member of the board of directors of the Goodwill Industries in Austin. Well, at the
Okay.
time, Goodwill Industries was not regarded as a pro-consumer, pro-disability program. It was a program for out-of-work people,
Okay.
basically. And
Yeah.
Justin was on the board of directors in Austin, and he called and said, Mr. Frieden, I've heard of your program and the work you're doing there in Houston, and I'd like to come and visit. Yoshiko and I will be there on Thursday.
Yep.
I said, well, you'll be very welcome. We'll be glad to show you around and meet you. I had no idea who he was, just
Sure. Sure.
that he was on the board of the Goodwill. On the day that he arrived, I was actually working on a grant proposal, and I asked one of my colleagues to meet him and show him around, and she did. And at some point, they stopped in and greeted me, and I was there working on the grant proposal. And I think I was polite,
Sure.
but I went back to work, and Lori entertained the Darts that afternoon, showing them around
Okay.
with them. So the next day, I get another call from this man, again, whom I did not know. He said, Lex, he said, I wanted to thank you for having us to the facility to visit you and meet you. And you were so gracious to have Miss Red there showing us around, taking time with us. And he said, I also want to compliment your business acumen. He said, making the judgment that you did to work on your grant proposal and the future of your program rather than ignore the work and just entertain guests. He said, that is very good practice. He said,
That's fantastic.
I want to compliment you.
That's great.
And I'll never forget that because had I known who Justin Dart was at the time,
Right.
I would have dropped everything. But as far as I was concerned, he just was an old guy in a wheelchair of a charitable organization. And we did, accommodate him.
At one point, did he bring you into the DC crowd?
Well, that it actually worked backwards. I was much more involved in the DC crowd than he was.
Oh, really? Okay.
Justin was at that point in time, he was just learning who was who. Now he evidently had made some contributions to the governor
Yep.
and of our state. And he convinced the governor to create a task force on disability to look at the state rules and state laws. And he arranged for the governor to invite me to be the chairman of that group.
Okay.
And so I appreciated that. And we did make a number of revisions in state law. In fact,
Yep.
our state, Texas, had the first architectural barrier rule in the state other than California.
Yep.
California and Texas were way ahead of the other states.
Sure.
Justin and I started to work together. He asked me to edit his papers that he wrote,
Okay.
and he was good enough to engage me in some activities that I otherwise wouldn't have been engaged in.
Okay.
And I introduced him to a lot of the disability advocates at the time. We had started a group
Okay.
called the American Coalition of Citizens with Disabilities. And the founders of that group included Judy Heumann and me, John Lancaster from the Paralyzed Veterans of America,
Yep.
Fred Schreiber from the National Association of the Deaf, and Eunice Fiorito from the American Federation of the Blind. So we had put together kind of the independent living programs, the blind groups, the deaf groups. We had the paralyzed veterans, and it was quite an involved leadership group there. Our objective was to have coalitions in every state.
Sure. And you're bringing diverse disabilities together, right? So it's not just the
That was
blind or the deaf
that,
or
that
the
was a
wheelchair bound.
that was a breakthrough. We called it cross disability,
Yes.
and that movement really was the inspiration that led to the ADA.
Yep.
Because before that, all the groups were fighting with one another, interested in
Right.
protecting their own turf. We brought the leadership of all those groups together so that everybody was on the same page. And our theory was we can gain more prestige, more power, more money, if you will, by collaborating and coalescing than we could each individually with our own personal interests.
Sure. And when you started to pull sort of the elements of the ADA together, you had this coalition of people that were articulating what they would like in the bill.
Well, sort of. Yeah, I mean, that was our objective.
Yeah.
And by and large, we achieved that, although we did early on have some differences of opinions. When you talk about legislation back then, we had the Rehabilitation Act of 1973. That was landmark. In 1978, 5 years later, that bill needed to be updated and reauthorized. And
Okay.
so authorization hearings, we were able to add independent living to the Title V. So now we had Title V and we had an independent living program in the middle of this vocational rehabilitation initiative. 5 years later, in 1983, we had to reauthorize that bill again.
Okay.
And in 1983, a group of us testified at the hearings uh, that we needed, in addition to those parts of the Rehabilitation Act, we needed to have a law for prohibiting discrimination on the basis of disability.
Yep. And this
And
was a testimony before Congress or the Senate or?
we mainly focused on the House of Representatives because
Yep.
the Senate was preoccupied with the Education for All Handicapped Children's Act.
Okay.
It's now called the IDEA. And the Senate was preoccupied with that. So we went to the House, and the chairman of the House committee was a representative from the Berkeley area, so he knew independent living.
Oh, great.
And our California colleagues had a good influence with him. And so I was one who testified.
Yep.
And our main objective was to get the independent living program funded at a higher level. But at the end of the testimony, my friend from Dallas said, Mr. Frieden, is there anything you would do that we are not doing?
Sure.
And I said, well, we need to have a rights of disability bill to prevent discrimination. And his response to that was, well, great. tell me what to do. And
Wow.
I said, I cannot represent 30 million people with disabilities. I said, that's not my job.
Right, right.
You're the representative. And if I were going to advise you, I would say appoint a blue ribbon panel to go out and do that research. I said, I'm a researcher. I
Sure.
don't make up ideas and then believe they're valid. I said, I'd have to go and interview a lot of people to answer your question.
Absolutely. Right.
He said, yes, we ought to do that. Come to my office tomorrow morning and we'll write an amendment to the law.
That's
That
great.
the chairman by this time was tired of the discussion. He ended the meeting, and that's the way it was. So I went to Mr. Bartlett's office the next morning and learned how to write an amendment to a law.
Wow.
That was OJT, I guess they call it,
I
on the
guess.
job.
Yeah, that's pretty huge. Now, how did George Bush get into your orbit?
So we're in this position now where Justin has some influence with the administration. He was involved with the Republicans through his family.
Yep. He's a major donor, right?
Well, surely, and
Right.
his father was a major donor,
Okay, got it.
and everybody in Washington, all the politicians, assumed that the son was the father's image, when in fact
Right.
the father had already told Justin that he was not not interested in having him as a son because Justin didn't follow the same footprint as the
Oh,
father.
wow.
Justin was much more interested in public policy and
Yeah.
charitable contributions than he was funding business. But he was a natural at business nonetheless and applied those skills to his advocacy. But, the Republicans liked the Dart name and made
Yep.
the assumption that anybody with that name was uber wealthy and influential. And so and furthermore, Ronald Reagan, being from California, where Justin's family lived,
Okay.
was sort of interdependent with the Dart family, I believe.
Okay.
So here you have Reagan as the president and Dart going to private luncheons with the president at the White House.
Sure.
And I'm here working with the Congress with Bartlett on the Republican side
Yep.
to get these amendments introduced. And together, then, we're working on the same path.
Sure.
So the House put in an amendment to the Rehabilitation Act to have this blue ribbon panel that I had designed. The House wants to have this blue ribbon panel. The Senate has already authorized a committee inside the Rehabilitation Services Administration. We'll take the House part of the bill and make that committee independent, and we'll take the House part of the bill and make the members appointed by the president and confirmed by the Senate to
Okay.
raise their prestige, I guess. And so the bills went together and they got passed, and that created then the National Council on the Handicap, now called the National Council on Disability. We changed not only did ADA change the approach to disability, but it also changed the vernacular.
Absolutely. Sure.
And then the Senate took it out of the auspices of the Rehab Services Administration and made it
Okay.
independent from the administration. So you had the president appoint the members, and then the
Yes.
Senate had to confirm them.
Okay.
So it required a partnership between the Congress and the White House in order to get members appointed. And there was, a new agency, so we had to have new space, and they had to have a
Yeah.
new director. And they sought applications for the directorship of the council. I did not apply. Justin called me and said, I'd like you to apply for this job. I said, I'm happy in Houston. I'm not interested in moving
Right.
to Washington. He said, well, do me a favor. He said, you're my pal. Come up here and do an interview. with these people so at least they have an idea of the kind of advocacy that we need leading
Sure.
this. Because he said, without that, he said, they're just going to be fixated on an old social service type or an old
Right, right,
politician.
right. Yeah, and you're on the ground. You've already built this program. You know the sort of major components of it, right?
That was his theory. So I went to Washington and I did an interview, and they said, "What would you do if you were the chairman?" I said, "Well, I'd do just what the law says. I I'd go out and I would sample the views of people with disabilities and then write a report, and those recommendations should carry the Congress and the White House to improve the lives of people with disabilities." And they said, "That's what you do?" I said, "That's all I do." I said, I, I'm an academician, you know.
Yeah.
We do research and we do reports. And that was that. And about 48 hours later, I'm back in Houston and I get a call, and the chairman of the committee said, our committee met and we'd like you to be our director. I said, "Well, honestly, I had no idea about that. I thought I'd just come and Mr. Dart asked me as a
Yeah,
courtesy
sure.
to make an interview." I said, "You had a lot of good applicants there." And I knew some of them. And she said, "No," she said, we want to get a new eye on this problem." She
Yep.
said, the people who've interviewed are old time Washington advocates. They've been
Right,
around
right, right.
a while. They got long reputations. And she said, "We want to get away from that. We want a new approach." And I said, "Well, I'll have to talk to my wife about it." And
Sure.
Joyce, she said, "Okay, well," she said, "I'll be glad to move as long as you find me a house with a yard so we can put the dog in it."
There you go.
At the time, Matt, I had no idea what the cost of real estate
Oh
was.
my gosh. DC versus Texas. Come on.
So anyway, we moved to Washington. I think it was important. The council kind of had a renegade view of
Yep.
the world, and they were not members that Reagan had appointed. Didn't have any long-standing debts to owe the community there in
Right, right, right.
Washington. They were outsiders coming in now with some authority. And the way they got there was Reagan knew these people. I mean, the woman from California that he appointed was Marion Kuntz, the first woman ever to be a bank president in the state of California. So she was a woman's rights advocate. She was a pioneer,
Yep.
but she had two children of short stature,
Oh,
two dwarfs.
wow.
And so she was also not only a very wealthy, very independent, very accomplished businesswoman, she was also the parent of children with
Yeah.
disabilities.
Yeah, she had personal experience. That's great.
Yes, at one point she and her husband had the largest miniature pony collection in the United States.
Oh my gosh, that's great.
And Sandra Perino is the parent of a child with a disability, two children, I think. And so she understood disability from a personal perspective. Justin Dart was the vice chairman of the council, and obviously he had personal experience with disability.
Sure.
An actress named Nanette Febvre, who
Okay.
had nominated for an Academy Award, was deaf. And
Oh, nice.
she had starred in a motion picture with Ronald Reagan and a monkey, I think.
Bedtime for Bonzo?
Exactly. So the disability advocacy community was very suspicious because these were all people that were kind of outside the
Sure.
advocacy movement. And they were also very conservative economically.
Oh, I see. Okay.
They were conservatives. It was depending on Dart because I understood his approach. He was
Right.
what you would consider, I guess, a social liberal and a economic conservative,
Sure.
which was an odd combination at the time.
Right at that point.
Probably still is. But so Justin was ran cover a little bit for the rest of them.
Yep.
And so Reagan was open to disability in a way that people wouldn't expect him to be.
Sure.
his vice president was George Bush, who nobody ever heard of.
Right.
In fact, the first job that Reagan gave Bush was to strip the regulations and rules for all the agencies because Reagan said there's just too many rules.
Oh, right, right.
And so Bush started to do that, and he got to this Education for All Handicapped Children's Act,
Yep.
and there were like 200 pages of regulation, and he was going to cut it down to 50. And the parents of disabled kids went berserk, and
Yeah.
they started writing and calling the vice president's office, and George Bush had an epiphany, and that is these people are great advocates.
Sure.
And, they really are serious about this. And he dropped all of that business about revising the rules
Yep.
and invited some of those parents to come and advise him, and he became more aware of the disability community. The council went off and have hearings around the country
Yep.
and get the views of people with disabilities. And I had the good fortune as the first director of that agency to be able to hire all the staff.
Oh,
I hired people with disabilities and
yeah.
disability advocates. One time our agency was received an award from the Office of Personnel Management
Yep.
for having the highest proportion of people with disabilities as any agency in the federal government.
That's great.
We had the highest proportion of women of any agency in the federal government.
Yeah.
And we had the highest proportion of people from racial minorities
Oh
of
my
any
gosh.
in the federal.
That's so cool.
Here I am being given an award by the Office of Personnel Management, and the Secretary of Defense is over there wondering, well, why don't
Who
we?
is this guy? Oh my gosh, that's so cool. So the kind of I'm sure that award raised your profile a little bit too.
Well, it did. Yeah, absolutely. Because I was, also an outsider, I had a little bit of influence, I guess, with the disability advocates, the old
Yep.
timers, because I was an
Yeah.
inside person with these elite Republicans,
Right.
and I can communicate with them and through me with the larger community. So everybody, played well together, and we were
Yep.
all on the same page. Bob Bergdorf advocated for himself to be the director of research and our
Yep.
attorney and so on. Bob had worked with the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission.
Yep.
He came over to work for the council. He had a disability. He was an attorney and he understood how to write these rules and laws.
Yep.
So Bob principally helped us write the report that included the ADA proposal. It was called the Toward Independence was the name of the report.
Okay.
The report had barriers in the process. I mean,
Yeah.
we had to convince the lower levels of staff in the White House that this should be done.
Sure. Um,
Well, we had a lot of advocates who were all the members of the National Council on Disability, 15 members who had a
yep.
lot of influence with the administration at that time and with the Republicans who were leading the Senate at that point. So we also had good linkages to the disability community
Yep.
through my former work and through Dart's work, and we got this Toward Independence written, and we wanted to present it.
Great. Yeah.
We had 13 principal recommendations there, including some having to do with health care, some with Social Security benefits, and so on.
Yeah.
And principal among them was this law that should prevent discrimination on the basis with disabilities. We called it an equal opportunity law because that sort of fit the conservative image better
Okay.
than a civil rights law, but it was
Yep.
the same thing. Everybody understood that.
Was this the point at which some of the other groups were feeling like the disabled community might be encroaching on some of the things they were doing?
Exactly. Well, and some of the disability groups were aligned with the civil rights movement as well.
Yes.
And so the groups that were aligned with the civil rights movement were skeptical about what we were doing, afraid that we were watering down
I see.
the concept of civil rights by
Yep.
having this equal opportunity law.
Yep.
And the other thing they observed was that remedies that were appropriate for discrimination on the basis of race and gender might
Yep.
not be remedies that would be sufficient for those made on the basis of discrimination on disability.
Sure.
So we were a little uh, at odds with those advocates for several years. They wanted to introduce a bill that would amend the Civil Rights Act
Yes.
rather than take our approach, which was a freestanding piece of legislation
Yes.
tied to Title V of the Rehabilitation Act.
Yep. Now,
We were
yeah.
here in 1983 with a report that we were working on, and that report was due in January 1986.
Yep.
So we did hearings around the country and worked on a report during 84 and 85. At the end of 85, then we were ready with our report to give to Congress and to the White House
Yep.
as law specified in January of 86. But we ran into some barriers, including the lower echelon of the White House, a man who objected to our proposal,
Okay.
and so we had to work past him to the president. And then we also ran into an issue with the printing of our report because the
Really?
government printing office, which is by law required to print all federal reports, told us that they were running 6 months to a year behind on report printing. And we had our report ready in December and it was due in January.
My God. Come on.
And they told us, they said, no reports are ever done on time. They
Oh,
all have to
come on.
wait on us. Said, I'm naive. I'm from Texas. I'm
You're
not,
right. Right.
I don't know your games. So if the law says it's due the end of January, we're going to have it done the end of January. Bob Bergdorf, attorney and research director, discovered there is an exception to the rule that the GPO prints all the reports.
Okay.
And that is the federal prison system.
Yeah.
Don't ask me. All right.
You're right. No, I love it.
So I went to the federal penitentiary in upstate New York. I met with the warden and I said, we need you guys to publish this report by January the 25th.
Absolutely.
And he said, I can't make that determination. I have to ask the prisoners. And I'm like, I learned something there, Matt. I thought
Yeah.
the prisoners were supposed to behave the way they were told to behave, but
Right. Right.
turns out the prisoners had a union.
The license plates union.
So I met with the union chief of the prisoners.
Oh my God. This is great.
And the union chief says, well, I'll take it back to the members. He
For a
said,
vote.
to get this done, we're going to have to work over the holidays. I don't know if the prisoners are going to sacrifice their Christmas and New Year's holidays. I'm
Oh
like,
my God.
boy, I'm learning a lot here, man.
Yeah, this is amazing.
What is this whether you're in a federal prison and you get Christmas and New Year's off, I guess? So he calls me up from the warden's office and he said, the prisoners voted to publish your report. And I said, well, may I ask what basis they made that decision?
Yeah.
Well, it turns out the prisoners feel like they have been discriminated against, many of them on the basis of disability.
Really?
And he said, we are really all in with you.
That's great.
So we have the federal penitentiary in upstate New York and those prisoners. And if any of them are listening to your show, thank you very much.
That's right. I love it.
sure-
Our rights are standing on the backs of some of the convicts. It's perfect.
I am sure they are all rehabilitated now.
Yeah.
For printing that. They did 10,000 copies of that report.
Wow.
And we had them ready. In fact, The warden brought two of the prisoners with him to my
Really?
to my office to deliver the report.
Oh,
And
that's great.
somewhere in the National Archives is a photograph of me and a bunch of reports and the two prisoners from the prison union in upstate New York.
That's fantastic.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. So anyway, we had our report. We distributed the report. We were ready to have the president of the United States. Reagan had agreed to do a press conference with us
Yep.
to announce to the American people that he was advising and supporting this proposal to
Yep.
have a law providing equal opportunity to people with disabilities. Well, on the morning of the press conference, about 8 o'clock that morning, I get a call from the White House, said the space shuttle has exploded on liftoff from
Oh,
Cape
oh, yeah.
and the president's schedule has been canceled.
Oh, geez.
And we were heartbroken
Sure.
for two reasons. Number one, we had lost some American heroes. Number two, all the work that we had done and the notoriety we were going to receive by having the president
Yep.
present the report was gone,
Yeah.
lost.
Yeah.
We could not replicate that.
No.
The president's schedule, according to the secretary whom I spoke to, would not be freed up for months after that.
Oh, geez.
So
So you lost your window.
she said, you guys, I'm sorry. By the way, the vice president down the hall doesn't do anything. I'll check his calendar. So she called me back. She said, George Bush can meet you guys in 3 days.
Oh, that's great.
And so we had a small delegation that included Jeremiah Milbank from New York, a
Yep.
very, very wealthy man who had been treasurer of the Republican Party when Reagan was elected.
Okay.
Included Mrs. Perino, the chairman from New York, and included Justin Dart, the vice
Yep.
chairperson, and me. And so the four of us went to the West Wing of the White House to George Bush. I had never met him before.
Oh, okay. Right.
When we went in there, I'll never forget. There was a man who was injured when he took a bullet for Reagan
Oh,
early,
right. Yep.
and this man had a brain injury. Um,
And
and
was it Brady or was it one of the Secret Service
it
guys?
was Brady, yeah.
Oh, nice. Yeah.
So Mr. Brady, I did not know this before then, but
Yep.
the president had given Mr. Brady, after his rehabilitation, had given him an office in the West Wing
Okay.
and an honorary position there. And Brady happened to be passing by the door of the West Wing when got in there that morning, and he gave me a thumbs up, his
Oh,
famous
nice.
thumbs up.
Yeah.
And I thought, this is a good sign. A good sign. So we went toward the office, and we were greeted there by a tall man who introduced himself as the attorney for the president, the chief counsel, Boyden
Yep.
Gray. And Mr. Gray pulled me aside and he said, Lex, he said, you don't know the vice president. He said Mr. Dart's met him, but
Yeah.
others know him. He said, be sure and let him know you're from Texas.
Okay. Yeah.
And I said, well, is that symbolic or what? He said, "Look,
Right. Right.
the vice president considers himself to be a Texan. So, just let him know at some point." And I said, okay, fine. So we also said, look, y'all, we're only going to have 3 minutes. The vice president's schedule is full, but they worked you in and you can get a photo op handing him the report.
Nice. Yeah. That's great.
He will probably say some nice things about, the committee and the report and so on. And I figured that's the best, we're going to do. Well, we got in there and handed George Bush the report. We got our photos taken, and I said, I'm from Texas. And he gave me that's a second thumbs up I got that day.
Nice.
And And we started to file out of his office. And he said, "Just a minute." He said, "Where are you going?" And I said, "Well, excuse us, but we understand you have a busy schedule." He said, "No," he said, this is too important. I'll cancel the rest of the schedule."
Nice.
I don't know who was sitting out there waiting to come in, but they were unhappy, I'm sure. So George Bush got behind his desk and we all crowded around it. And he
Yep.
said, I read this report last night with Barbara. And he said, "This report rings true to us." He said,
Yep.
"We have a child with a disability and we lost a child with a disability when she was young.
Yeah.
And we were always concerned about how Robin's life would have been.
Yeah.
We're concerned about our boy now who has what we understand is a reading disability,
Yeah.
dyslexia, no, but he might be on what they're now calling the spectrum." And so we had a 30, 40-minute conversation with him.
Wow.
At the end of the conversation, when we left, he said, "Now, look," he said, "I'm interested in this."
Yeah, right.
And he said, "I'm all in." But he said, "You guys got to remember, I'm just the vice president." He, he said, "If you read the newspapers, I don't do much around here."
Right.
So he said, "But let me tell you, if I do have a chance in the future, I'm going to do whatever I can to support your initiative."
That's
And
wonderful.
that's the way we felt. We felt like
Yeah.
we'd achieved something, but at the same time, it was kind of almost an empty promise.
Yeah. Yeah.
That was a very significant, and there's an iconic photograph of that somewhere. Anyway, we left. We were happy. We distributed our report on the
Yeah.
Hill. There were receptions, big receptions. I remember Steny Hoyer, a member of Congress then, whose wife has epilepsy.
Okay.
Steny is still a member of Congress and a leader in the House of Representatives. Steny Hoyer stood up in front of a group over there in the Senate and said, "This is the Declaration of Independence for people with disabilities.
Yeah. That's great.
We have to pass this bill." That was 1986. Now,
Yeah.
2 years later, the council at a meeting said, I would report to them every quarter on the
Sure.
progress of our recommendation. 2 years later, the Congress had acted and the president had acted on 12 of our 13 primary recommendations.
Wow. That's great.
They'd already passed the Fair Housing Act,
Uh-huh.
or it was well on its way to passage. They had already passed a provision in the National Parks Bill to make them
Okay.
accessible. They already had an Airlines Access Act underway. They were about to pass. And I said, but here we are in 1988, 2 years after we made the recommendation,
Yep.
and no action's been taken on this other bill. I
Sure.
said, it seems to me, having talked to a lot of members, that they really don't understand or can't figure out how to implement this recommendation.
Right. Right.
So,
Right.
it seems to me that we ought to give them an example of what a law would look like. And I had that experience. Uh, we Bergdorf took the leadership on writing a proposal, and we consulted with the disability community
Yep.
over a period of months there, and finally produced another report that was called "On the Threshold of Independence." The first
Okay.
one was toward independence. The second one.
Now we're on the threshold. We're getting there.
Exactly right. So that was the ADA proposal, and that was introduced at the end of the session in '88. And then, of course, there were elections, and we never did have hearings on that first bill, the 13-page or 14-page version of the ADA bill that the council wrote.
Yeah.
Baker, who was a senator from Connecticut who had a child with a disability with an intellectual impairment,
Okay.
i- introduced it, and there was a House version introduced that Tony Coelho, who had epilepsy, introduced. So we had the bill was introduced, but it never had hearings. And then we had the election, and they had to start all over again. But one significant difference was that Reagan had been, ended his term and Bush had been elected president.
Yeah, sure.
Now, Bush remembered the promise that he gave us when we gave him the report 2 years before that. And the night before the election, he bought 30 minutes of airtime on the networks. And among the things that he said he would do if he were elected,
Yep.
but he would sign a bill making people with disabilities free from.
Oh, I didn't realize that was part of his election campaign.
Exactly right.
That's great.
And we had it all in. I mean, we had been working behind the scenes.
Yep.
So the Democratic candidate for president also had that on his platform.
Right. It was Dukakis, is that who it was?
That's right. So we had the Democrat and the Republican who were already, before the election, committed to helping us. And when Bush made his first speech before the joint session of Congress,
Yep.
1989, among the things he said he wanted to do was to sign a bill ensuring equal opportunity for people with disabilities.
That's great.
So that, those were significant steps
Yep.
toward the ADA. Now it had to get through the Congress. It was reintroduced. This time the Congress had shifted from a Republican Senate to a Democratic Senate.
Yep.
Weicker was an independent, but he wanted a Democrat to carry the bill because he thought it would have more influence and impact that way.
Okay.
Tom Harkin, whose brother was deaf, took over the bill, and Harkin rewrote it. What was 13 or 14 pages was now 52 pages.
Wow.
Bobby Silverstein, an attorney who'd been in Philadelphia, was working for Harkin then and helped to retool the bill and make it more specific.
Okay.
And that bill went forward, and the House met it, and the House leader, of course, there was Hoyer, whose wife had epilepsy, but also a man who led the committee in the House that was responsible for the disability legislation, African American man
Okay.
named Owen. And Major Owen was the first librarian to serve in the United States Congress.
Oh, wow. Nice.
Major Owen was also from one of the heavily African American districts in New York. And so he was a great civil rights advocate himself, and he understood intuitively what we were trying to do. So Major Owen became a huge leader and an advocate. He doesn't get enough credit today. People don't remember him well enough, but he is an icon. And he was joined by the Republican leader in the committee, who was Bartlett, the man who in 1983 did that original amendment to get the council created. And Bartlett was a huge advocate. He's the one who championed the law on the amendments to the Social Security Act.
Yep.
Which created 1619, some people will know about who benefited from that. So anyway, we had leadership in the House and Senate now who were ready. On the Senate side, the Republicans were led by two outstanding members of the Senate. The leadership in the House were very, very supportive of the ADA, but the problem was it had to go through every committee. In order for a bill to become law, it has to go through a committee, and the committee that will have jurisdiction is determined according to what the law says. So if it's a law that has to do with defense, then the defense committees in the House and Senate have to prove it. If it was a law that had to do with rehabilitation, then the committees in the House and Senate that are responsible for rehabilitation would have to approve it. In our case, the ADA covered virtually everything:
Right.
transportation, purchasing,
Yeah,
equipment.
yeah.
Therefore, that bill, unlike virtually any other bill, had to go through every committee in the House and Senate.
Oh my gosh.
So not only did we have to have the leadership and the members in the Congress supporting ADA to get it through the committees,
Yep.
we had, we had to have a majority support from every committee in the
Oh my
Congress.
gosh. Oh my gosh.
And some of them were easy, okay? Well, I
You're
mean,
right.
but a couple of them gave us real problems, and one of them was the committee that had jurisdiction over civil rights
Okay.
in the House. And that committee was influenced by these civil rights advocates that
Yep.
were concerned about the ADA getting into their turf.
Right, right, right.
And so they were cautious about it. And majority of that committee was also influenced by small businesses that had an interest in the bill and did not want to see it pass.
Oh, I see. Because they'd incur costs to retrofit their businesses to accommodate for disabled people?
They thought, although we had a loophole for them, which exists today. Nonetheless, we wound up going to the day before the committee in the House responsible for civil rights. And I got a call from the staff of the chairman who said, we're sorry to tell you that your bill may not get through this committee.
Oh,
And
no.
I said, well, what? It has to. We've been working too hard and too long.
Right.
What could we do? And the woman said that maybe if I'd talk to the chairman of the committee, because he was inclined not to support the bill either.
Right, right.
And and so the next morning I went to the office of Jack Brooks, the congressman from Beaumont, Texas. And Mr. Brooks had been in the Congress for decades. And he said, well, he said, I'm glad to meet you. He said, glad the president appointed somebody with a disability
No,
to be
sure.
working on this. But he said, I'm getting a lot of pushback from the civil rights community, and NAACP is not in favor of your bill. And he said,
I mean, why would they be? I don't understand exactly what would they be upset about?
they did not get disability. They didn't
Oh, I
understand.
see.
They said discrimination on the basis of race
Yep.
is clearly discrimination. Discrimination, from their standpoint, on the basis of disability was just life as it goes on. That there's no genetic test for disability.
Yeah.
There's no racial profiling that could be done. They did not make the leap to disability profiling and disability discrimination. They
Yep.
just did not. For them, it was an impersonal kind of discrimination. The personal discrimination they understood had to do with race and partly with gender. So they had a hard time reconciling the disability horning in from their standpoint on their turf.
Yeah.
So that, they were skeptical and not in favor. And that group, along with the small businesses,
Yep.
had a scary kind of a influence for us at that time.
Sure.
Anyway, I said to Mr. Brooks, look here, this is the same deal. And he said, yes, I kind of get it, but I got to go with my constituency. And I'm
Right,
running for
right.
election in Beaumont, Texas. I represent some union districts and some districts that are heavily African American and minorities. And he said, I've got to stay with that community and support them. And I said, in my opinion, with due respect, I think you have to do what's right for the American people.
Absolutely.
And he found that offensive that I would even suggest that. And then I said, is there anything, we might be able to do to support your campaign? I know you have a tough reelection. And he said, yes. He said, it's the first time I've really had any real competition.
Yep.
They put up some real good candidates down there, and he said, I do need the help with the campaign. He said, "Do you think people with disabilities vote?" I said, "Yes, I'm sure they do. They probably vote in larger numbers than other groups
Sure.
if the reason for them to vote." And he said, "Well, do you think you could give me a picture holding a baby with a disability?" And I thought to myself, I said, "Man, this guy is off his rocker because
That's right. That's right.
I don't know how that's going to get any votes." And I sort of mumbled something like that. And he said, he said, "I understand those parents." He said, Bush had problems with those parents. They
Yep.
made him, and he recalled what went on with those rules and regulations.
Sure. Sure.
He said, if those parents can get so excited about something and I can get them excited about my election, I can win that election."
Absolutely.
And by the way, Matt, that was very insightful. That most politicians wouldn't have considered the disability voting block.
Right. Right.
But
Right.
he had put two and two together, and he wanted that picture with a disabled child,
Right.
so he could identify with those parents that he knew would vote.
That's right.
And I said, I'll get you the photo, I guarantee it, which I did.
Sure.
I had about a dozen parents visit his office later
Take your pick.
with their children and have a lot of photographs taken, let me tell you.
That's great.
And he won his election too, by the way.
Nice.
Anyway, Brooks then said, "Okay," he said, "I appreciate you coming here. I'll see what I can do." He said, "You're in my heart, and I'll see what you can do with the committee." So the next day, the hearing was held, and I was there, and Congressman Hoyer was there, not on the committee, but he was lobbying the members, and he gave a sign and said, "We're about 50 here." And he was
On the vote.
polling at the time, and they were about to have the vote when the bell went off in the hearing room, and the bell goes off in all the hearing rooms when there's going to be a vote on the
Yep.
floor of the House.
Sure.
And at that point, the committees are supposed to suspend action, and the members run over to the House to have their vote. Well, all the members who did not want to be on the record one way or the other, they didn't want advocates on either side to be upset with them. They took this as an opportunity to get the heck out of there,
Right.
not be on the record when they have a vote.
Yeah.
And they started heading for the door. And Brooks called the sergeant at arms. "Sergeant, lock the doors." And they all turned around like, what happened? And
Right.
Brooks said, "Look here," he said, "we're going to have a vote before any of us leave this room.
Yes.
And we've been
Excellent.
debating it, and now is the time to vote. And I want you guys on a record here so we have a legal vote with a quorum."
Yep.
And this moved on, so we go to the other business. And they all kind of came back up to the dais and sat down, and he called for the vote. And sure enough, the bill was passed through that committee. And that was so that was one example. Another example was the Small Business Committee. Chief of that was a member of the Congress House from New York. And I remember at the hearing, he said, "Well, I understand why these small business people don't want this bill to pass." He said, "I got the problem myself." He said,
Right.
I have an office in upstate New York, and it's on the second floor of the building." And he said, "My landlord is not going to put in an elevator, and I can't afford to put in an
Right.
elevator. And I don't know, how I'm going to meet the requirement of the law
Yeah.
with my office up there, and I can't break my lease and move it downstairs.
Right.
There's no space downstairs." And he said that, "I understand why these people are concerned about this."
Yeah.
And I said to him in the hearing, I said, "Well, sir, if you have a constituent in a wheelchair that wants to meet you, what do? Don't you just go downstairs and meet them?" And
Right.
he said, "Sure I do." He said, "I go downstairs in a minute if Granny wants to meet me or a person
Sure.
or whoever." He said, that's what I do." And I said, well, then you've met the requirement of the law. That's called a reasonable accommodation. You can't afford to put the elevator in. That's obvious.
Yeah.
And you will, however, make an accommodation anytime anybody needs it.
Yeah.
He said, well, yeah, absolutely. He said, that, that, that's easy. He said, that's obvious. And I said, well, that's the law. That's what you're talking about.
That's great. So you gave him an example of reasonable accommodation. He was able to understand it and kind of change his mind, right?
Exactly. I've got a copy of that record, and you can see his attitude change at that point in time. He started thinking the advocates for the small business were a little bit out of line.
Right,
And
right.
so it was that, yeah, that
That's
was
great. So then the committees kind of all line up. You get it passed. Where were you when you heard about the ADA getting passed?
well, I was back in Houston, and by then I had moved from Washington. I really, after 4 years being up there, Matt, I had a heart. I'm not cut out to be a politician in the sense
No,
that
you add the weather to it and everything else. Forget it.
it was for me kind of hard after four
Yeah,
years.
Lex, that was one thing I really wanted to ask you about because you're a decent guy and you're looking out for people's rights. And you go to Washington with something that sounds very logical. You want, liberties and civil rights, but you have to go through all of this kind of rigmarole and fighting for it. What was your impression of the way the government works?
Well, I went for the benefit of people with disabilities, all
Absolutely.
disabilities. That was my objective, to do what I could do. And I had the benefit of having really good friends, really good supporters, really good colleagues, including members of the Congress, staff of members of the Congress, including the members of the National Council on Disability,
Yeah.
and including my longtime friend and dear departed Justin Dart. That we all together um, were allied in this effort, and it was really important that we make the sacrifices necessary to get it done. But I really found a lot of the politics to be petty. I felt like a lot of the decisions were based on sort of pettiness, on payola, if you will.
Yeah, absolutely.
I didn't feel comfortable in that environment where people were trading favors on issues that affected people's lives with really taking into account their constituencies as I believed they should. I was able to rationalize it during the time I was there. But
Yeah.
after I felt like we had achieved our objective, I did not want to become one of those bureaucrats who just sit there and take on the next project without having any interest in it. I was interested in and committed to disability rights. Like we had achieved that objective, then my job was done. I was ready to go back to Houston, where I could teach, where I could work with colleagues, and where I could be in a community that was aligned with my interests and objectives.
Yeah. That makes sense. The other thing I wanted to ask you was I'm hoping that some listeners of my podcast will be young disabled people wondering what their path in the future is going to look like. And if there's somebody that is not politically minded, but socially minded and wants to make a difference, is there any advice you could give to them of how to get involved?
Oh
Your
yeah,
experience.
yeah, yeah, yeah. People need to go to their precinct meetings.
Yep.
Whether we like it or not, the United States, as it relates to policy and programs, revolves around the elected members of Congress and the elected administration. And the people who wind up as candidates for election do so through the parties themselves. So the parties are responsible for putting forward candidates and
Yep.
providing support for them. And those decisions begin at the precinct level.
Okay.
Anybody who's interested in affecting the outcome of elections
Yep.
needs to start in their own neighborhood. And every neighborhood in America has a precinct. And you need to find out what precinct, and that's according to the voting district, what precinct you're in, find out who the chairman of the precinct is. And you can call the local party offices and they'll tell you, or state party offices, and they'll tell you who your chairman is, and you can get in touch with that person and find out when the meeting is going to be of the precinct. And they usually have a meeting a year, maybe sometimes two. Go to those meetings, meet the people. You may not agree with them. That's part,
Right, right.
but you need to go to one or the other, the Republican or the Democratic precincts, and keep going and become a fixture there and meet the people and tell them what you represent and listen to their viewpoint and see if you can agree with them or not. And if you don't agree with them, then get some of your neighbors who do agree with you to go to the meeting until you have a majority in that
That's
meeting.
great. That's great. Take the
Hey,
grassroots approach. Just get together and make your voice heard. Right?
yeah, yeah. I mean, I was like from another planet when I would go to the precinct meetings because here I am, a guy in a wheelchair,
Yep.
and one who is kind of a socially oriented in a different direction than
Yeah.
some of the members of the committee. I'd talking to neighbors, found out who was the parent of a child with a disability or related, and
Yeah.
you'll find out that most people have a family member or friend or relative who has a disability. They can understand our issues. And, I got them to go with me. I'll give you a cup of coffee if you
Yeah.
go with me
Right.
to this meeting, and you get enough of them together, and then you have a vote and your side wins. Then you got a whole precinct. Then the precinct elects people to go to
Yep.
the next a regional meeting.
Yep.
So if you got a majority of the people there who will vote for you, you can go to the regional meeting, and then you play the same game
Yeah. You
again,
just take it on
you
up, right?
all the way. And
Oh,
I
that's great. That's
and
great. Well, listen, Lex, I want to be mindful of your time. I usually close these episodes with a weird question, but I think you'll appreciate it, which is if I were to clone you, which the world needs more Lex Friedens in the world, but if I had two Lex Friedens sitting in front of me, what question would I ask to determine the real Lex Frieden?
what question would you ask to the real?
To reveal the real Lex.
That's a question that I will have to think about, Matt. I mean, it's a good question. Hopefully, I have revealed myself in the conversation that we've had.
Oh, yeah. No, I could pick you out. No problem.
And as far as revealing the real Lex Frieden, I try to be transparent, and I don't think there's anything that I would necessarily or intentionally hide. I'm pretty open.
All right. Well, let me ask it a different way. What if you had a side with your barbecue? Would it be macaroni salad or baked beans?
Baked beans.
I could get one out of you.
Yeah, baked beans, and I
I love a good baked beans.
and I'd burn my steak too.
Yeah, there we go. That's what I like to hear. Oh my
Uh,
God. Lex, you are a legend. I feel fortunate to have spent time with you, and I look forward to meeting you in person one day. But I can't thank you enough just for doing the podcast, A, but B, what your work and what you've done for the disabled community. I've felt it in my life, and my life wouldn't be the same without it. So thank you so much.
I appreciate it, Matt. I really do. People have said that before, and I sometimes think if it had not been me, it would have been somebody else. I mean, there's
Yeah.
a certain destiny to our lives. And I feel fortunate to have had the opportunities that I have had. At some point, however, the community was destined to be free,
Yep.
and I think ADA achieved that. It wasn't simply my work. I happened to be in the milieu at the time, and fortunately, I've lived long enough to remember a lot of things that some people can't.
Yeah.
recall anymore. They're not here to recall them, but I am blessed to have a community that I'm comfortable in and people that I love. And I love disability advocates and independent living advocates, and I do anything I can do to support all the young folks who are coming up, but some of the oldsters who need a little refreshing.
That's great. That's great. Well, you're a good man, Lex.
All right. Thank you.
I hope you enjoyed that episode, and I hope you'll click like and subscribe so you can beat the mighty.